I have been very passionately anti-consumerism on this channel for a very long time. And I have a very long running series of videos that I call anti-hauls because when I started making them years and years ago, that's what they were called. Well, fast forward to the rising popularity of TikTok, and different trends have started on there that seem really similar to the anti-consumerism, anti-haul vibe. And one of the first trends that I noticed came up that seemed really similar was called deinfluencing. And that trend was essentially trying to be in contrast with the huge amount of influencing you to buy things that was happening on the app. And at the time, TikTok was just developing their shopping part of the app called TikTok Shop. So de-influencing seemed like a really good contrast to how much influencing you to buy things that you didn't even consider needing before was happening. Well, fast forward to right now at this point in 2024, and there's a new trend that is very similar that is called underconsumption core. So this, to me, seems like a response to hyperconsumerism, overconsumption core, the normalization online of buying things all the time, hauls happening always, having perfectly aesthetic everything all the time, the latest, trendiest, coolest things, and that being what is seen as the norm on social media. Essentially, anti-consumerism is trendy, and I noticed different types of trends that these sub-trends attach themselves to when it comes to anti-consumerism, and I kind of just want to analyze it from my perspective and look at the way the internet is reacting to all of these things and talk a little bit about if the thing that I am most passionate about in this world, which is being anti-consumerism from an environmentalist perspective, if it's trendy. So first, if you're new to my channel, I talk about anti-consumerism from all perspectives. I think there are so many reasons that we need to step away from the consumerism culture that is very dominant. And when I talk about it being very dominant and it being problematic and all those sort of things, I'm speaking to it from a perspective of an American. From the amount of consumerism that happens in the US, that is the perspective I'm speaking to it from. Everything we buy has an environmental impact, and not just when we throw it away, but before it makes it to us. And that's always been my biggest passion, is to try to get people to understand that the things that we buy are made from natural resources. They had to be extracted from the ground at some point, and all of the human rights and environmental issues that comes with extracting things from our planet. When we talk about things that go into our phones, we sometimes clear cut forests and completely remove mountains and contaminate people's drinking water and soils so that they are no longer able to grow food for themselves. And there's labor exploitation throughout that whole process. And all of that happens before you buy it. It's about a lot more than recycling the things that we're buying. But sometimes I also like to hit on the ways that consumerism is bad for our mental health, because constantly buying the latest and greatest and trendiest thing and expecting that to be what makes us happy is not only not actually going to make us happy in the long run, but it's also detrimental to our mental health to constantly be looking for those dopamine hits in small bursts that only last for so long as the item is new. You know what I mean? And then you need to go back and do the same thing over and over again to keep that flow of dopamine going through our little human brains. I was on that hamster wheel for a long time, and I know how not good it was for my brain. So I do like to talk about it from that perspective, and also obviously from a financial perspective. Staying on that hamster wheel will keep you broke. And especially when we're speaking to it from the state of our economy right now, a lot of us do not have disposable income to be wasting right now. And I also wonder how much the state of our economy plays into when we see these anti-consumerism trends come up. We probably will talk about that. But I grew up in a house where we had a back bedroom when I was younger that my mom would just constantly fill to the brim and then have to go through once a year and like get rid of all the things that she was buying that she didn't need. And she bought the same clothes all the time, but wore the same like few of them, and they all looked so similar, but she was always needing more. And my mom, like when I was growing up, like from my perspective now, made a good income, especially adjusted for inflation. My mom had it good. For someone who, like my dad, was kind of paying for a lot of the household bills and things, and the money that she earned, which again was a decent wage, she was just spending. And it was to the point where we would go to Kohl's and spend so much money that we couldn't go the next week because she had to wait to get paid again. I grew up thinking that always buying new things was going to make me happy. And at some point, I learned about the environmental impact of consumerism, and then I started to examine how it was impacting my mental health and all those sort of things. But I want to preface this video with all of those things because I think the way that we interpret what is underconsumption and the way we interpret what is overconsumption is going to vary depending on our perspective in the world. And I think it's important to kind of get to know what my perspective is if I'm going to be talking about these things. So if you've never heard me talk about this before, you should probably hit that subscribe button because I feel like you're going to like it here. But the reality also is that a lot of people in the US have a lot of disposable income, and we have much higher consumption footprints and therefore environmental footprints than most people around the world. So I'm speaking to all of these things from that perspective, from the fact that a lot of Americans have a lot of disposable income and they spend it on things that are destroying our planet, and we really desperately need a culture shift there. So let's start with the way that possibly these trends are popping up in correlation to other trends happening, but also in trends of the economy. So I would say that the anti-haul hit its peak in popularity around 2019. I would say was when anti-hauls were really, really popping. And we can think back to what else was happening in the context of the internet and culture and the economy in 2019 and question what was it that was making anti-hauls so popular, that people wanted to be told not to buy things. What else was happening for that to be popular? And when I look back to 2019, something else that I think was really popular at the time was minimalism. Like there were documentaries coming out left and right, and kind of what was happening in the cultural zeitgeist kind of held on a lot longer than things do now. Like I think trends that happen now, the trend cycle and just like what people are talking about and culture and all of that is much shorter because of things like Reels and TikTok. And I think people were realizing that they needed to get rid of more stuff. And I think in contrast to that, the anti-haul was a way to talk people out of buying more things. It gave people a reason to be told, here's why you don't need said thing, while haul culture was also a big thing happening at the time. And so I think in contrast to that being what was happening in one subset of online culture, anti-hauls were the answer to those things being popular. And now if we fast forward to when de-influencing became popular, which was last year, I think the de-influencing trend, I kind of already alluded to this, but I think it was a response to TikTok Shop. Honestly, TikTok Shop turned every average person scrolling or casually posting on the app into an influencer, into someone trying to sell you something. And it really makes me sad because I have found a lot of community in TikTok. I have found a lot of just like learning. I feel like I've learned so much. I've opened up so many new perspectives for me through TikTok. And dare I say, TikTok has radicalized me. Some people don't like when I say that, but it's true. That's the most frustrating part of consumerism for me, is when you see something online and you click a link and you buy it, and the friction between seeing it and buying it is so easy and small now that people are buying things that they don't even really want. For the first time for me, I started to see that influencers all had the same aesthetic, and it was you read certain types of books. Colleen Hoover. Everyone has the same lip gloss, the Dior lip oil or whatever it was. Everyone has the same UGG slippers, and like that is what an influencer looks like. And I think that there was a need for de-influencing at the time, that everyone didn't need the $500 pair of headphones or the $200 pair of shoes or the $50 lip oil or whatever it was. We were also entering into a questionable financial circumstance. Inflation was reaching a point where we were feeling it on a daily basis at the grocery store. Contrasting that with what we were seeing on social media, which is you need this super expensive high-end thing to be the cool person or to fit in or whatever it is, whatever that emotional tie is to get you to buy something. I think de-influencing was a direct response to that. Now, I will say that that trend, which was de-influencing, kind of got co-opted pretty quickly. If you were on social media at the time, it became like, don't buy this expensive thing, buy this cheaper version of it instead. So all those things I just talked about, the headphones, the shoes, the books, the lip glosses, it was, well, here's a very similar thing, but cheaper. It is not normal to be able to see thousands and thousands of things a day that other people are telling you is great and that you should buy, and then have to make the decision every day to buy it or not. It's not normal. So taking that same culture of constantly being told you need to buy things and just saying, yeah, you should, and here's a cheaper version of it. It solves the issue of constantly feeling like you're going broke trying to keep up with what's cool, but it doesn't address the environmental concerns, and it doesn't address the mental health concerns, and just the overall problematic nature of us being disconnected from everyone and everything, because if we buy the thing, then we feel like we're a part of the community that we were trying to be a part of, but you're not really. So I guess there's an environmental, a cultural, and a mental health aspect of it. That's kind of where I see where the de-influencing trend came from. Let me know if I forgot anything, or if you saw anything else that you think led to de-influencing becoming a trend. And when I say a trend, I mean like lots of videos on social media, lots of news outlets covering it because it was trending and having people comment on why it was trending and those sort of things. It definitely rose in popularity, but it kind of died down, I would say, towards the beginning of this year. And just about a month ago, not too long ago, did we see the rise in the new thing, which is underconsumption core. I think underconsumption core is definitely happening for a similar reason that the de-influencing trend happened, but now it's this response to so many people trying to curate their homes to looking so perfect. And that's kind of always been a thing on social media, but when you're scrolling past like hundreds of those a day, well, eventually you're like, is that what my life is supposed to look like? And why doesn't my life look like that? And I think underconsumption core is a direct response to that. So underconsumption core might be my favorite of all these trends that we've seen because it shows the inside of regular people's homes. A lot of influencers are just lifestyle creators, and they do spend most of their days trying to figure out how to make their homes look perfect. Normal everyday people who spend the time between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. not worrying about what their space looks like don't have the ability to curate a perfectly aesthetic home, because we see more people's homes through a screen than we do in real life. Think about it. Think about how many people's homes you're in on like a whole yearly basis, right? I maybe go to my cousins, my mom's, my sister's, couple of my friends. Maybe at most, I'm in a dozen people's homes a year, and I see what homes look like through that way. Like that is what normal is to me, right? That creates what I see as core, right? Core is just the aesthetic of your home. But on social media, I can see dozens of those in an hour. And it starts to warp our reality because the people's homes I'm seeing spend all day curating what their home looks like. I think underconsumption core is just a direct response to that, to being like, this is actually what normal people's homes look like. Like you take out your phone and this is what my freaking reusable rags look like, and they're not perfectly aesthetic and they're not all matching, and I don't buy new ones every other month because of whatever pattern is the most trendy. This is what underconsumption core looks like, in contrast with the overconsumption that we see through influencers on the internet. I just kind of want to see what normal everyday homes look like. Core. That's my core. You know what I mean? So underconsumption core is my favorite because it contrasts all of those things, and because it makes it very clear that like most people are not doing this hyper-consumerism thing. The reason I am really like excited about that is because I feel like the more normalized it becomes to replace your towels every few months because you saw something cute. You know, just all these various things that I feel like lead to consumerism, not because of utility, not because you needed new dish towels, simply because you found some cute ones. That type of consumerism is the type of consumerism that I feel like needs to stop. And I feel like seeing what everyday people's homes look like informs that it's not normal. Everyone is not doing this thing where they walk into Target and replace their plates because they saw cool new ones. Other people just have like mismatched plates that they've had for years, and like normalizing that. I just want to get back to the reason that we're buying things is because of at least utility and function, and not just because it's cute. Not buying into trends all the time because, you know, the latest whatever clothing, home decor, whatever it is trend. Seeing normal people not doing that is definitely going to be helpful, not only to our finances and obviously the environment, but definitely to our mental health. To not feel like we are always striving to be better, and by better meaning that we need to buy more things. I just can't imagine how much better for our mental health it would be if we did normalize underconsumption core and we got to see more of that. Speaking of, what makes something underconsumption? What makes something under and then normal and then overconsumption? How do you decide what is supposed to be normal when our normal is so influenced by what we're seeing influencers buying and what their homes look like? Does that move that baseline, and how do we readjust it and find what normal is? Because the average American buys 7 new pieces of clothing every single month. Is the average American what is normal? Should that be considered normal consumption? Because globally, buying 7 new garments every single month would be hyper consumerism, would be overconsumption. Do we take what the average is for the US and call that normal? Or is what the standard is in the US already overconsumption? And a lot of the commentary I've seen online is actually around that. There's been a lot of people being like, this is not underconsumption, this is just being poor. And then people who choose to consume less for environmental reasons, things like that, being like, no, I don't do this because I'm poor. I do it because I'm a conscious consumer. I am conscious of the impacts of the things that I buy. And then there's people who are making jokes of underconsumption, and I have to assume that this is children, because what they're basically doing is being like underconsumption core, but then showing all of the ways that they are like over consuming, like it's a joke. And I guess if you have not really thought through all of the reasons and the pillars that we keep talking about of reasons that over consumerism would be bad, mental health, cultural impacts, financial impacts, environmental impacts, then it might seem like people are just talking about overconsumption for no reason. So the impacts of your actions don't happen in a vacuum, but a lot of times the feedback when trends like this happen is that. So that's been a little bit of the response to underconsumption and overconsumption. And I would love to get your feedback on how you define what is normal, under, and over. And I feel like maybe a better baseline for what normal consumption is would be meeting your needs and every now and then fulfilling wants. For me, my version of consumerism is anything that is not a need, I try to meet it secondhand, and even my needs I meet secondhand. Yeah, and then I think anything kind of over that is overconsumption. But I would love to hear what you think on that front. Now, every time one of these newer trends kicks up, different trends and like different media outlets online pick it up and they'll start talking about it, my favorite thing to come out of it is some of my favorite thought leaders or commentators or just people who look at things going on and comment on them. They'll start commenting on them. And one of my favorite people to get their perspective on things going on with environmental things is Isaias Hernandez. If you guys don't follow him, queer brown vegan, always has the best takes. But I wanted to play his kind of like feedback on this being a trend and also his love-hate relationship with this trend specifically, but I feel like with all 3 of the trends that we've talked about.
First of all, underconsumption is basically repackaged poverty lifestyles into sustainability. Now, I'm not saying that people who are promoting underconsumption are doing bad things. I think it's important that we show the general social media user that we cannot live an over-consumer society that is very materialistic and draining our ecological and our own resources of the ways that we see the planet and ourselves. I do think that it does raise awareness of like, yes, like we should be better consumers, we should repurpose our things, these are realistic things, but the systemic action is still lacking. And I feel that, to me, I'm looking back at the 2010s when the trash jars were so popular, is that it's not really gonna stick long term if it's not pushing people to think more radically. Americans spend $1.2 trillion annually on non-essential goods that we don't need. To me, deinfluencing, minimalism, zero waste, low waste, imperfect environmentalism, these all share a common theme of their limitations of what it takes to create more change in our cultural society. And I really fear that if we don't move beyond the trends to unpack deeper levels of conversations or add more critical analysis and literacy of the ways that we talk about consumerism, I fear that we're going to just stop there at just saying, here's a hard drive, you can recycle it, and then that's it. And it's like, we don't want that. We want more systemic change now.
I definitely agree with everything Isaiah said there, but I think for me, the takeaway is that we keep trying to find consumer solutions to a systemic problem, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. The only thing for me is, well, not the only thing, there's a lot of things, but one of the things for me is that systemically, governments, corporations, etc., they have no motivation to change without a cultural shift. If consumers continue demanding unethical labor practices, unended resource extraction, if they continue to love this hamster wheel of consumerism, and that's what they keep giving and voting with their dollars to see more of, then at that point, governments have no reason to act. Corporations have no reason to take a step back from maximizing their profits if their consumer base is not asking for it. Absolutely, we need a culture shift, because without one, there is no motivation for the people at the top who are gaining from this system to change. As a person, I don't want to support that problem. As a person, I want to buy less. As a person, for all of the reasons we've already talked about, I'm not going to put my money into that system, and I have the privilege to be able to choose to do that, so I should. At the end of the day, we have to shift away from consumerism, and at the end of the day, away from the economic model that incentivizes endless growth. That is a systemic problem and absolutely part of the discussion. I also think that he hit on this, he touched on it, but it should really also be said that in a lot of the criticism of underconsumption core is repackaged poverty. And it is a really interesting discussion to have that people who look like me, when they talk about buying less stuff, it can be seen as cool. And in this case, we're talking about it being a trend, whereas people who are underconsuming not by choice, simply because of the economic system we live under and their circumstances, well, it's not seen as cool and trendy and a good thing anymore. Then it's kind of looked down upon. There's definitely room for criticism of underconsumption core being criticized as repackaged poverty, but now since people who look like me are talking about it, it's cool. We should also comment on that if we're talking about it in the greater context like we are here. This is such a big idea that is kind of harder to break it down into chunks. But the bigger thing that I'm noticing throughout this consumerism hamster wheel, if you will, is the need for community, and the answer for that for so long, at least for my generation, being what you're buying. We kind of talked about the corification of everything, which is you fit into XYZ community and that is your core. There's goblin core, cottage core, underconsumption core, goth core, all those things. If it's your aesthetic, it's called your core. But in a lot of ways, that is kind of how we identify ourselves these days. And I have a whole video about it, and I'm sure I'll make a bunch more. But it really is this deep problem, I think, with our culture, that now we don't connect with people because of who is nearby in our community, like our neighbors. We don't connect with people because of our hobbies, because hobbies are largely, unless you make a very conscious effort to have hobbies, they're not something that most people have. The list goes on, that people don't have community based around common interests and common goals and those sort of things anymore, because we are just so separated. And in place of that has been sold to us community through consumerism. The way you communicate that you're a crunchy granola core girl is by what you're wearing and not necessarily by what you're doing. And I feel like I definitely made a video about that recently. You should go check that out, and I'm sure I'll talk about it ad nauseum. But I really do feel like people have traded community for consumerism. And we need that culture to shift so that people can find purpose and community through the things that they care about and the things that they do instead of through the things that they buy. And I think if we can solve, or at least begin to work on that issue within our culture, we can work on this consumerism culture, and we can also use that influence and that culture shift to influence the system to change. I just think it's really interesting to look at all these trends and ask ourselves why anti-consumerism peaks every couple years, and if those peaks and those discussions and those changes in awareness lead to the eventual culture shift that I keep saying we need, and how you think we can help it get there, how you think we can work together to actually make that culture shift happen, because I think it's working in certain communities, but we need to shift it out to even more communities. And this is why communities are just so important, because me, as someone who is part of the environmentalist community, and I'm also part of the LGBTQ community, I can take the important things from this part of my environmentalist community and bring them into the LGBTQ community. And then it expands from there throughout different communities when we talk about things because we care about people and we care about how things impact them, and we are connected via community. All of a sudden, everyone is connected and we care about things because we care about people through community. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. And because of the things that we touched on today, I want to say, do your best and advocate for the rest. Bye, guys.